Hey everyone, welcome to Bumbling Through Dungeons. My name is Mark. This is a show where we talk about dungeons, dragons, and everything in between, which really wouldn't be too much if we were talking about, say, like the dictionary sense of the words, because we'd only have like the D's, but we're not. So that's good. And today's topic is quests versus adventures versus journeys. And those might all sound like the same thing, and really they can be used a bit interchangeably. But we're going to talk about, first, I'm going to define what I mean by the three of those so that you see how I'm delineating between them. And we're going to talk about how each one of them can be used really well in your D&D game. So I'm going to look off camera here because I've got them pulled up. I'm actually pulling these definitions from a blog article that I read years and years ago. And I think it's very germane to the conversation of D&D and the ways that we incorporate different types of adventures into what we do. So the way this, and I'll link to the blog down in the description as well. There's also a post on my blog on bumblingthroughdungeons.com. I'll link to that one, and you can read more about this topic here. But a quest is, according to this blog, and again, there's different ways you could define any of these words, but for our purposes, a quest is a trip to accomplish a specific task. An adventure is a trip without a destination. And a journey is when the trip is more important than the destination. So, one, trip to accomplish a specific task. Adventure, trip without a destination. Journey, when the trip is more important than the destination. So I think already you can start to see how the three of those, and the way I'm defining them, helps to create differences of how you can use those three types of things in campaigns. And one thing that I'll say is that these aren't dictionary definitions. I'm not getting this from Webster's or dictionary.com or whatever else, Merriam-Webster. This is defining it in these ways for our purposes. There are other ways you could define quest and adventure and journey, and a lot of them would be pretty similar, but in defining them in these three ways, I think that it speaks to three very different definitions of types of adventures and types of goals and quests that you can run in a D&D game. So within our definition structure, the quest is the one that we're most familiar with, and we're familiar with it from everything: movies, TV, video games, actual tabletop RPGs, most things that you've played or done or watched, where it has, go to X location, get Y, and then bring it here. So that's your classic fetch quest. There's 100,000 of those in RPG video games and tabletop RPGs and things of that nature. So go to the abandoned mine and kill the goblins who are terrorizing the area so that the goodly people can get back to what they're doing. That is a quest. That's something that has a very defined goal. So you know what the destination is, you know what the goal is. The destination doesn't have to be a place, it can be a task, but you have a very defined sense of what it is. Now, with goals like this and with quests like this, I think that a lot of people get pigeonholed into thinking that this is very linear, it's very limiting, that you shouldn't be using them that often. And I don't think that's the case at all. You just have to sort of expand what we mean by this. Take an adventure that I've talked about frequently on the channel here, like Curse of Strahd, which is it's a very well-regarded adventure in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And I would call it a quest because it has a very defined goal, and you're really never deviating from that over the course of the adventure, which can last dozens of sessions. So the goal is, kill Strahd, find a way to dispatch of him, and escape Barovia. Those two things never really change, and they're not really going to change from group to group either. You might have sub-goals, you're certainly going to have side quests within it, but the overarching goals and quest within that, the whole thing is bound together by those two goals, those two quests. And so in that sense, it is very defined. It's not an adventure as we're defining it in this video, where you're just sort of going out into the wilderness and finding what you will and trying to do good in the world. There might be a tiny bit of that here and there, and a lot of these can mix and match even in the same campaign, but the campaign as a whole in Curse of Strahd is a quest, and that's okay. You can have that. Sometimes having a very clear definition gives purpose to groups, especially I think with newer groups who maybe aren't as adept at creating their own goals and creating their own sense of adventure and pushing the boundaries of what can be done in the world. A lot of times, especially, again, when you're starting out, and maybe with some established groups, they like having that clear sense of purpose, that clear sense of direction. So I think using this, not just in the short term, but for the long term, can work. But it can also be mixed with the other two that we're going to talk about. So in our lexicon for the video that we have here, an adventure is a trip without a destination. So here, it's going to be a little bit more open-ended. And this might be the style of campaign or an arc within a campaign that is more defined by what the players decide to do rather than a goal or quest that the DM lays out in front of them through an NPC or something along those lines. And eventually, with any group, no matter how nebulous the campaign is and how adventuresome they are, eventually, at least at times, they're going to go from not having a destination to picking a goal or destination, and it's going to become a quest again. They're going to decide what's important to them, and then it is going to narrow again. But unlike something like a Curse of Strahd, what will then happen is everything will expand out again, and they will have a lot of possibilities because they're adventuring. So this is your group that might be roaming the land trying to do good deeds or seeing where the fates take them. It might be a group of murder hobos, to use a classic term of the genre, who aren't necessarily always doing good, but maybe they're just looking out for themselves and seeing what opportunities arise in the places that they travel to. So this is something where there are goals, but they're not specific. And it might just be a sense of adventure and wonder and wanderlust that drives some of them. Now, again, either on an individual basis or on a party basis, eventually you're probably going to end up on a quest. It's like, oh no, the kingdom is in peril, do such and such a thing. Or, oh, we want to go steal these goods from these people because they don't deserve it, and we're going to put it to better use over here. So it will become a quest, either for short or longer term periods of time. But you can absolutely run campaigns that are adventures in a very open sense, and then go in and out of certain quests. Okay, and last we're going to talk about the one that I think is probably the most difficult to talk about, and that's the journey. And that's where the trip is more important than the destination. So I'm sure we've all heard the cliche and somewhat sappy line that, the real treasure was the friends that you made along the way. And this is, of course, sappy and cliche, but it speaks to something that I think not enough adventures take advantage of. And that's that sometimes the stuff in the middle can be just as interesting for the individual players, for the world around them, for the narrative, as the final destination, the final goal that they're getting to. So within something that you might consider a journey, there are going to be one or more goals. And the players will be working toward them, but you might have, this might be more of an exploration campaign where there is a goal. Say they're out in the wilderness and you have a hex crawl, or even if it's not a hex crawl, maybe you're taking more time with the travel aspect of what's going on, and you've got more encounters and you've got more settlements and towns, and then you start to work in NPCs and faction motivations, and there's other things going on, and it's not going to be their main goal, but there are other things happening, and they're going to learn and grow, and things are going to happen, and they're going to create change in the world, and that might be more important than the thing they're ultimately trying to get to down the road, literally and figuratively down the road. And I want to talk a little bit about an adventure, and I actually struggle calling it an adventure, but it's one that I read and purchased on the DM's Guild, and I haven't actually run it with a group, and it's because it's very tricky figuring out how I would want to run it. And when I describe it to you, I think you'll understand why. But it's definitely one that focuses on the journey, and the destination is a bit of a red herring. So I'm going to describe this to you, and I think you'll understand why it fits into this framework of what I'm calling a journey. And you might get a sense of what I'm thinking of and what I'm talking about when I talk about a journey being inserted into a campaign. So in this particular adventure that I assume would play out over more than one session, it's not quite a one-shot. There is a town that the PCs enter, and there's a witch, and everyone knows there's a witch, and bad things have been happening about town. There's various things to investigate, and the entire adventure is, figure out who the witch is. And so it can take place very quickly. It can take place over a longer period of time, multiple sessions. And there's different routes that they can go down to investigate these people and figure out what their motivations are and what some of their secrets are. Sometimes dark secrets, sometimes not so dark secrets. It's a very interesting sort of miniature sandbox where the different areas of town and different people in town are the different things that the players can be interacting with and bouncing off of in interesting narrative ways. And maybe they decide that such and such is the witch, and they kill the witch, or they put the witch on trial, and maybe they come to the conclusion that they can't figure out who it is, or maybe they banish the witch, or maybe everyone just gets so paranoid that they start turning on each other and other people get hurt. There's a lot of different ways it can play out because there's a lot of different tensions and motivations in the town. And what ends up happening is there is no witch. No one is the witch. And the whole point is, when the players, the PCs, get inserted into this situation, how do they deal with it? And you might have a very altruistic, kind group who's trying to come to a conclusion for the village that gets the least amount of people hurt. And that could be one outcome where nothing too bad happens. There could be other outcomes where a lot of suspicion gets thrown on people, and in trying to prevent further ills or pranks or deaths or whatever it is, somebody ends up dying, or somebody ends up getting banished from the town, or any number of bad things happen. Maybe something gets burned down. Maybe other people decide to start leaving town. Maybe there are riots. Like, it could be as benign or as terrible as you can imagine, and everything in between. And it's based solely on what the players decide to do. So this is one where the journey is everything. It's not more important than the destination. It is the destination. And that's why it's fascinating to me. And it's also why it's scary for me to run, because I'm not sure how it would play at the table. I'm not sure it would go over as well as what we're used to, which is the quest/adventure structure that I outlined in the first two definitions. So to me, it's very interesting, but also something that I think would have to be something that you're comfortable running if you're the DM, or something that the players are going to be comfortable playing. Now, it doesn't have to be as dark as the witch scenario that I outlined. It could be any number of things, but you could probably start to envision other scenarios where how they deal with the problem becomes more important than solving or not solving the problem itself. And that's a perfect example. That's a perfect storm, this adventure that I found. But I don't think it's the only way that you can do that sort of idea. So what's my overarching point here? Well, I don't know, but if there is one, and I usually try to have a few wrap-up sort of takeaways from the video, it's probably that if you're DMing, just keep these in mind. Keep these types of adventures in mind. The quest, the adventure, the journey, and the different ways that they could be mixed or matched, or how could something be elongated so that the journey becomes more important and it's not just about the destination. That might be in small chunks. It might be very interesting for your players, and it might change things up a little bit. So I think it's important not to become stagnant in your DMing, in your games. If everything starts to feel same-ish, then you're probably not going to enjoy it as much, because the unexpected isn't there. And I think one of the easiest ways to continually refresh and keep things feeling new and interesting is to mix and match different styles of play. I try to do this in the encounters that I develop. I try to do this with the NPCs and the plot hooks that I throw at the players. And I think you can do this with the types of plot hooks that you throw too, and the way that you execute them. Because the same plot hook might be executed in 3 different ways to to accentuate these three different play styles of quest, adventure, and journey. So it might be something where the they don't have a specific destination in mind, and you give them a bunch of different ideas, and maybe the plot hook you would have given them had you only given them one is in there, and they choose one and they do it, and it's fun, and they're adventuring, and they're choosing their own path. But you're still giving them a quest, you're still giving them a linear point, a goal to work toward. And then some other time you might take a very similar, or you might take that same exact plot hook and you might place it, you might make the destination, the literal geographic destination, pretty far away. And then you might have it take some time, you might slow down and elongate the time it takes them to get there, so that a lot of complicating factors get thrown into the mix. Or you just throw so many different motivations and personalities and ways that it could turn out into one singular problem, like the town with the imaginary witch, that how they solve the problem becomes just as important, or perhaps more important, than whether or not they solve it in the first place. So I think it's probably easier, as with the town example, to do that when there are a lot of different people involved, which means a lot of different NPCs, which might be hard to run as well. So that last one I would use more sparingly, but I do think I'm going to try to run some adventures, probably not one-shots, because one-shots, I think, by their very nature, have to be very goal-oriented. But in a campaign, I think there's going to be moments where you can do that sort of thing and have it be more about the development of the characters in the location, whether it's the player characters or the NPCs or the way they interact with one another. Have it be more about that than about the specific goal. You know, it doesn't need to be something world-ending. You don't always need to be throwing the next direct plot hook at them. There are times where even a minor problem might become a large issue when enough people and enough different perspectives are thrown into the equation. So that's very interesting to me. I'm going to be looking for opportunities to use that in my game to see how it goes. I think there are probably, if I really dug into my DMing history, there are some times where there were some journeys where the destination wasn't as important and it was how they got there. But I don't know that I've done that deliberately. I don't know that I've planned that out to have situations like that where it's more about how they deal with the problem. And if you have, I'd really be interested to hear about it, because this is something that when I encountered this idea, both through that blog post and in talking to people who DM and about their styles of DMing, I realized that it's one that not a lot of people do. So if you've run some adventures like this, maybe like that one that I mentioned with the imaginary witch, or something along those lines, let me know, either down in the comments here on YouTube, or you can always find me on Twitter. It's at BT Dungeons, and that's it. That's all I got. I don't want to do another take, even though that was a really inelegant ending. So I'm going to end it there and wish you well until the next video. Until then, take care.